welcome to another episode of the FinScience podcast. Today, we'll be joined by Ellen Zhang, who is a graduate at Deutsche Bank. Now, today we'll just be going through an intro to university, so talk about societies, what life looks like as a first year. Ellen was actually recently a FinSoc subcommittee member, so she knows all about it. And just to give you a bit of background, she studied commerce, majored in finance, and look at where she is today. She's in Deutsche. So we'll just take it away now. So how did societies help you in your early years, and how did you make the most of your early university career?
Yeah. So societies were definitely a pivotal part of the first year university experience, especially for me. While I did come into uni with a few of my high school friends, not all of the people from my high school did come to UNSW. So I sort of struggled to find new friends. And that's where societies really helped, where you can develop that friendship and bond with a group of people that are sort of working together towards the same goal, which is, improving the society and making it better. It was suddenly a lot of fun. And I think that's where you learn a lot of the key skills that you need in the future. As a lot of the classes that you learn within uni don't really teach you the practical skills of potentially working within a team and sort of knowing how to talk to people and communicating effectively.
Yeah, no, I think that's the same for me as well. Societies really have where majority of my friends are. So would you say you still keep in contact with a lot of your society friends that you made?
Yeah, I do keep in contact with them. In fact, sometimes, or quite rarely, you still go on meetups where you try and get as many people from your portfolio, for example. But the main point of societies was more to develop that friendship because you didn't have that sort of direct person-to-person contact from classes. Because I came in during the first year of COVID. So all of my classes were actually online and we couldn't really meet any new people.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, I guess, but look at us now. So yeah, that just off the bat of that, you had activities inside and outside the classroom. So what did a typical week look like as a first year finance student, in your case especially?
I mean, for me, it might be a bit different to the current cohort just because my degree was the old degree. But I think there'll be a lot of similarities in that you're still going to classes and you're still learning about finance, though now it's been combined with other topics, but still just learning all the same in regards to commerce and sort of going to classes, attending them, watching your lectures, which I do emphasize is very important. Definitely don't leave cramming. Yeah, don't leave cramming to the last minute because you will regret it. And you want to get as high of a score as you can in first year because classes do get harder throughout the years. But moving on from that, you do sort of see your friends outside of class, but also once you start doing societies, you do have a bit of portfolio work and usually have a meeting or two every week, which lasts for like an hour or so.
Okay. Yeah, the meetings are sometimes long, but I can tell you as well, they are very rewarding and always fun. So, it's so easy for people to burn out in university because like you said, the classes only get harder and harder as your degree progresses. So how do you keep yourself motivated and avoid burnout when attempting to balance with academics and co-curricular?
Yeah. So I think the biggest key for me was sort of keeping my eye on the bigger picture, where it's more about stepping back and not getting too caught up in the personal, like the little failures that you experience along the way. Because no matter what, there will be things that you don't potentially land the first time round. And sometimes they can be quite demoralizing. But by stepping back and sort of looking at your overall progress, so thinking about the benefits that you've learned from that experience, it does help a lot with burnout and sort of keeping up your motivations, especially as the year progresses and you sort of learn more and see more. But also for me personally, to keep my eye on the bigger picture, I would write out lists for myself. So I struggle with focusing on a lot of small tasks if I don't write them down. So I tend to try and write it down on a piece of paper or on just a notepad somewhere, and just look at that as a tick list of what I've done, what I have to do, and what I should be planning for in the future.
Yeah, it's very good advice. So, like I said, challenging, but it's also challenging as a student in the earlier years to approach industry workers. There's always that stigma, like, oh, it's like you're going to be talking to the company. So it's a bit intimidating at first. So were there any conversation starters that you used to network professionals?
So conversation starters were always really difficult for me too. I was actually pretty shy, so going up to people is always like intimidating, and that's why I sort of recommend introducing yourself first. It does help the other person get a better feel for your background and perhaps where you're going with your questions. Especially if you're doing it in a sort of like speed networking event where there's a lot of different students and maybe they're not really that familiar with university. By giving them a bit of a background about yourself, like it helps personalize you and make it so that you're not just another student in the crowd. So again, the questions you ask do sort of vary depending on your situations. So they usually vary from like, oh, like what do you do on a daily basis, or why did you pick the company you're working for, or like how is your work-life balance, for example. Though that last one can be a little bit touchy if they're getting worked really hard. But it's always good advice to sort of pivot from these sorts of generic questions where you're just asking about work-based experiences into something that's a bit more personalized. So like maybe pivot with like hobbies, for example, as I do feel that it helps them remember you a bit more, in that, again, you're not just another one of the students that was asking just solely about work, but rather that you're someone that they can talk to and, you know, have a genuine conversation with. Yeah, that's always useful.
That definitely sounds like it is. I think sounds also like something I could bring to interviews. But we'll get to that later. We'll talk about the professional side now, especially investment banking. So it's definitely a profession where you need a lot of preparation from first year even. So what did you prepare on a yearly basis to help you get from where you were in your first year to a graduate analyst at Deutsche Bank?
Yeah. So in my first year, because my degree was 3 years, I had to basically get a pretty big move on, where my first year was spent mainly networking. So I signed up for as many networking events as I could, even if I felt in the moment that I sort of couldn't be bothered to do it or it just seemed like a lot of effort. I felt that it would pay off later when I actually start applying for things and, you know, just having that first-hand experience of talking to someone in the industry and learning about what they do can help a lot when you're narrowing down your choices or sort of identifying which companies you want to apply for in your second or essentially penultimate year. That is where you have to do a lot of applications, especially for the internship process. Yeah, the process is quite rigorous. So I do recommend that you get your resume or cover letter up in advance. So it saves you a bit of time when you're going through all the interviews or video interviews or assessment centers, for example.
Yes, that's very good advice. I know that FinSoc definitely has some events that are helpful with the application process, so something to look out for in the future. Was investment banking always something that you wanted to do from the first time you stepped into uni?
So I was actually going for accounting at first, but
Oh,
then
okay.
frankly, I did some accounting courses and I realized I don't think I want to do this for the rest of my life.
Okay, fair
Which is
enough.
why I sort of pivoted. Yeah, which is why I pivoted to finance. I did find the work a lot more interesting, and I think it was also following a failure in an interview that I decided to start going for finance roles. I found this really interesting accounting role, as interesting as accounting can be. But I pretty much failed the interview. I do remember the moment And yeah, essentially I decided accounting isn't for me, finance is where it's at. Time to sort of pivot my experiences and start focusing more on finance roles and seeing where you can go with them.
Yeah, well, that is very good advice. It's also nice to know that it's not too late to change. It's never too late to change, hopefully.
Yeah,
But
like no matter where you are in your degree, I do think there is always possibility to like change or at the very least adapt your courses to learn more about maybe different majors that you're interested in. You're definitely not locked in first year or second year or even third year, depending on the length of your degree. And you know, sometimes things aren't for you, and you find something else that's more interesting. You can always change.
always, always can. That's very insightful. But that's all we have time for. Thank you so much, Ellen. And I hope everyone will find this very insightful because I certainly did.
No worries.